Thanks everyone for coming to another Authors at Google SF. Today we've got Paolo, and you know what, I'm just going to be honest, I'm not going to try to butcher your last name. But Paolo is going to be talking about The Windup Girl as well as his former collection of short stories. The Windup Girl was named one of the best novels of the year by Time magazine, Publisher Weekly, Library Journal, a number of other prominent publications. It was nominated for the very prestigious science fiction Hugo Award, and recently won a Nebula Award for Best Novel. And what's special about that is that this is his first novel. And I believe it was Gibson, William Gibson, you said, is the only other science fiction author who has won a Nebula for their very first novel. So Hugo's and Nebula's very prestigious awards, but a special honor to get it for his first novel. He is also a Theodore Sturgeon Award-winning science fiction author and fantasy writer from Colorado. His fiction has appeared in a number of magazines, including the Magazine of Fantasy, Science Fiction, Asimov Science Fiction, and a number of other publications. His short fiction, the work before this, was collected in Pump 6 and Other Stories. And I've personally been reading The Windup Girl. I'm absolutely immersed in the disturbingly relatable future that Paolo paints, a semi-distant future where the fundamentals of society have changed much less than we would hope, which I feel adds an undertone of even more haunting realism. So I think you're going to enjoy it. Certainly we're going to enjoy the talk by Paolo. Thanks. And if all video conference offices can make sure to mute for the entire talk.
Okay, can people hear me okay? I can't really judge levels if I can see heads nod or something like that. Okay, great. This isn't actually my natural mode to be standing in front of people, so this is a little more, I'm supposed to be behind a computer hiding out in a dark room somewhere, not in front of all of you. So it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but I'm gonna try not to be crazy up in front of you. Yeah, my name is Paolo Bacigalupi. That's, and yeah, I live in a small town in western Colorado. I've been writing for about 15 years. And while this is my first novel that's sold, it's not actually my first novel. I originally started writing when I was about 23 years old. And I was sure that I was going to be some wonderkind, amazing writer who would have my first novel sold by 25 and I'd be rich and famous and all these other things. And so I actually did quit my day job when I was 23 to sit down and write my first novel. And I told everybody I was going to do it because I didn't want, to back out. I was going to write this novel. I quit my job and I did all this research and I wrote this novel and I got myself an agent and we sent it out to publishers and it was promptly rejected by everyone. And I thought, well, okay, that's fine. That's my first novel. I'm gonna try again here though, because I think I've learned some things this time around. And so I wrote another novel and I sent it to my agent and he sent it out to all these publishers and they all rejected it again. And so at that point I thought, well, okay, now I've definitely learned some stuff. And so I sat down and I wrote another novel. And each one of these takes me about a year and a half to write. And so I've written another novel and I'm getting half-time jobs on the side and stuff. And my wife is like being really supportive, but also like trying to believe that I'm not crazy. And I write that third novel. And I write it, I send it to my agent, and this one my agent actually rejects out of hand. He just says, this is crap. Okay, so now I think I'm learning here. I'm try, fail, learn, okay. And so then I sit down and I'm like, okay, I can do this. I'm gonna write another novel. And I do, and I write my fourth novel. And I send it to my agent and he gets really excited. He's like, this I can sell. And he sends it out to all the publishers and they all reject it again. And so at that point, I know I'm crazy. Even though my wife hasn't told me I'm crazy, I know I'm crazy. And I really can't take the idea of being rejected anymore. And I really can't stand the idea of writing for a year and a half to write a novel that's going to fail anyway. And so I started writing short fiction instead. I still liked writing, but I just, that process of putting everything in and then seeing nothing come out was just too much. So I started writing short fiction instead and figured, well, I guess writing's going to be a hobby. I'm not going to be anything at all, but that's fine. And at least I get to write, and writing makes me less crazy than when I'm not writing. So I I started writing short fiction, and everything sort of changed for me at that point. The first story that I wrote after that was called The Fluted Girl, and it was selected in science fiction for several different years' best anthologies. The next story that I wrote after that was called The People of Sand and Slag, and it was nominated for the Hugo and Nebula Awards. The story after that was The Calorie-Man, and that one won the Theodore Sturgeon Award for Best Science Fiction Short Story of the Year, as well as being nominated for the Hugo Award. And it kind of kept going like that. And so suddenly I started thinking, wow, maybe I'm not crazy after all. I should write another novel. And this time I was like, I really have learned some things. I'm going to write this in a year. I know what I'm doing. And so I sat down and I started working. And I started to build out this story. And the more I worked on the story, the bigger it got. And so 1 year became 2 years, and 2 years became 3 years. And I suddenly had this monster of a novel that had gone off in all sorts of different directions. And when I finished it, or sort of finished it, I was actually thinking, this book needs to die. This is bad. This is really bad. And I know how to fix it, though. And my wife was like, no, don't touch it. You can't touch it. Send it out. And so I sent it out, and my agent took it, and she sent it out to publishers, and every single one of them rejected it again. Except for that this time there was a small press publisher in San Francisco called Nightshade Books, and where there hadn't been that kind of a resource before, Nightshade was willing to take a risk on a dark dystopic science fiction novel about crushing environmental issues and say that that was actually worthwhile to publish. And I think much to all of our surprise, it actually started to sell. What was interesting to me about that is, like, writing science fiction almost automatically in commercial sense is a bad idea. And you know that because anytime you walk up to anyone on the street and say, hey, I write science fiction, they say, step the fuck away. And did I just say that on streaming? Shit. And science fiction just isn't respected. Science fiction, when you say the word science fiction, people already look at you and say, I don't read science fiction. You say, well, but there's good stuff in science fiction. There's really interesting ideas here in science fiction. And what you find is you've got that wash of the assumptions about science fiction are, oh, you write Star Trek, oh, you write Star Wars, oh, maybe you write Avatar, Aliens, something like that. Or even worse, it's Barbarella. And it's rocket ships and, old amazing stories, babes on the covers and, scantily clad. And that's sort of what science fiction means to people. And that's really weird because to me, science fiction is so much more than that. And I'd actually like to read something from my short story collection, actually, that sort of illustrates a little bit of what I think is interesting about science fiction. And this is from a story of mine called Pop Squad, and I'm sorry for all of you who are eating at the moment. The familiar stench of unwashed bodies, cooked food, and shit washes over me as I come through the door. Cruiser lights flicker through the blinds, sparkling in rain and illuminating the crime scene with strobes of red and blue fire. A kitchen, a humid mess. A chunky woman huddles in the corner, clutching closed her nightgown, fat thighs and swaying breasts under stained silk. Squad goons crowding her, pushing her around, making her sit, making her cower. Another woman, young-looking, pretty, pregnant and black-haired, is slumped against the opposite wall, her blouse spackled with spaghetti remains. Screams from the next room. Kids. I squeeze my fingers over my nose and breathe through my mouth, fighting off nausea as Pentel wanders in, holstering his Grange. He sees me and tosses me a nose cap. I break it and snort lavender until the stink slides off. Children come scampering in with Pentel, a brood of 3 tangling around his knees, the screamers from the other room. They gallop around the kitchen and disappear again, screaming still, into the living room where data sparkles like fairy dust on the wall screens and provides what is likely their only connection to the outside world. That's everyone, Pentel says. He's got a long, skinny face and a sour, small mouth that always points south. Weights seem to hang off his cheeks. Fat, caterpillar brows droop over his eyes. He surveys the kitchen, mouth corners dragging lower. It's always depressing to come into these scenes. Well, they were all inside when we broke down the door. I nod absently as I shake monsoon water from my hat. Great, thanks. Liquid beads scatter on the floor, joining puddles of wet from the pop squad along with the maggot debris of the spaghetti dinner. I put my hat back on. Water still manages to drip off the brim and slip under my collar, a slick rivulet of discomfort. Someone closes the door to the outside. The shit smell thickens, eggy and humid. The nose cap barely holds it off. Old peas and bits of cereal crunch under my feet. They squish with the spaghetti, the geologic layers of past feedings. The kitchen hasn't been self-cleaned in years. The older woman coughs and pulls her nightgown tighter around her cellulite, and I wonder, as I always do when I come into situations like this, what made her choose this furtive, nasty life of rotting garbage and brief illicit forays into daylight? The pregnant girl seems to have slipped even further into herself since I arrived. She just stares into space. You'd have to touch her pulse to know that she's alive. It amazes me that women end up like this, seduced so far down into gutter life that they arrive here, fugitives from everyone who would have kept them and held them and loved them and let them see the world outside. The children run in from the living room again, playing chase. A blonde, no more than 5. Another, younger and with brown braids, topless and in makeshift diapers, less than 3. And a knee-high toddler boy, scrap diaper bunched around his little muscle thighs, wearing a t-shirt stained with tomato sauce that says, "Who's the cutest?" The t-shirt would be an antique if it wasn't stained. "You need anything else?" Pennell asks. He wrinkles his nose as new reek wafts from the direction of the kids. "You get photos for the prosecutor?" "Got 'em." Pennell holds out a digicam and thumbs through the images of the ladies and the three children, all of them staring out from the screen like little smeared dolls. "You want me to take them in now?" I look over the women. The kids have run out again. From the other room, their howls echo as they chase around. Their shrieks are piercing. Even from a distance, they hurt my head. Yeah, I'll deal with the kids. Pendle gets the women up off the floor and shuffles out the door, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the kitchen. It's all so familiar. A typical floor plan from Builders United, custom undercab lighting, a black mirror tile on the floors, clever self-clean nozzles hidden behind deco trim lines. It's all so much like the stuff Alice and I have that I can almost forget where I am. It's a negative image of our apartment's kitchen. Light versus dark, clean versus dirty, quiet versus loud. The same floor plan, everything in it the same, and yet nothing is. It's archaeological. I can look at the layers of gunk and grime and noise and see what must have underlain it before, when these people worried about color coordinating and classy appliances. I open the fridge, smudge-free nickel, how practical. Ours contains pineapples and avocados and endive and corn and coffee and Brazil nuts from Angel Spire's hanging gardens. This one holds a shelf cluttered with ground mycoprotein bars and wadded piles of nutrition supplement sacks like the kind they hand out at government reju clinics. Other than a bag of slimy lettuce, there isn't anything unprocessed in the fridge at all. No vegetables except in powder jars, ditto for fruit, a stack of self-warming dinner bins for fried rice and lap and spaghetti just like the one still lying on the kitchen table in a puddle of its own sauce, and that's it. I close the fridge and straighten. There's something here in the mess and the screaming in the next room and the reek of the one kid's poopy pants, but I'm stumped as to what it is. They could have lived up in the light and the air. And instead, they hid in the dark under wet jungle canopy and turned pale and gave up their lives. The kids race back in, chasing each other all in a train, laughing and shrieking. They stop and look around, surprised maybe that their moms have disappeared. The littlest one has a stuffed dinosaur by the nose. It's got a long green neck and a fat body. A brontosaurus, I think, with big cartoony eyes and black felt lashes. It's funny about the dinosaur, because they've been gone so long, but here one is showing up as a stuffed toy. And then it's funny again, because when you think about it, a dinosaur toy is really extinct twice. Sorry, kids, Mommy's gone. I pull out my Grange. Their heads kick back in successive jerks, bang, 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 down the line, holes appearing on their foreheads like paint, and their brains spattering out the back. Their bodies flip and skid on the black mirror floor. They land in jumbled piles of misaligned limbs. For a second, gunpowder burn makes the stench bearable. All right. So the thing I like about science fiction is the opportunity to take what looks normal and then to twist it, to to take an idea and stretch it out into some unreasonable place where you think that the world is going to be safe and stable, and then to rip the floor out from underneath you and drop you into something else. Ideally, that process is a bit like stretching a rubber band. You pull somebody out into a different world, and then you let the rubber band snap, and when people come back to this world, they're going to look at our place now, the present, with a different lens as well. And that's really the thing that excites me about science fiction, and it's a tool in science fiction that you really don't get to use in any other genre or any other style. It's what science fiction does best, and it's what I love. So despite the fact that science fiction is sort of scorned, this is the place where I get to play with the tools that give me an opportunity to talk about the world in some really interesting ways. The thing I'm sort of looking for is that opportunity to help people see what they thought was normal as abnormal. And the best personal description I have of this is a time when I was a student in China. I'd gone over to China to study Chinese. I'd done an immersion program, and while I was over there, I spent, I guess, about 6 months, and I came back to the States, and I was at my college, and I was sitting out in the quad, you know, in the park, and there's trees and everything. And it was really beautiful, and it was like the first time I'd been around greenery in a long time. It was really beautiful, except for that there were all these rats running around in the quad. And I kept looking around at all these rats. I saw them, and there's a rat, and there's a rat, and there's another rat, and nobody else seems to care at all that there are these rats running everywhere. And then I suddenly realized they were squirrels. and I was like, they're squirrels. Okay, they're squirrels. And I'm still thinking, do people really let these rodents run around? Really? Why do they feel okay with this? Why don't they kill them? Why don't they, I mean, this has to be bad. And it was that moment where the place I'd been for a while didn't have squirrels running around, and so they just disappeared as a natural element of what we consider our sort of pseudo-natural urban surroundings. And so coming back into that, suddenly that was alien. And so normal became alien, and that's the moment when you can actually start looking at our customs and habits and saying, well, why do we do this? Why do we live this way? Why do we have this kind of a world? And all things can be up for grabs and all things can be questioned. I think that's really interesting. The other thing that I'm really interested in science fiction is the process of extrapolation. And for me, the quote that sort of sums that up is William Gibson's comment that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. Which I love. And, you know, being at some place like Google where you guys are actively, you know, sitting around in your computers building the next iteration of the future that's going to be evenly distributed or more evenly distributed is really interesting to me. You guys are seeing nodes of future that could come into being. And in science fiction, that idea is really powerful. And so I'm really interested in looking at little data nodes and sort of saying, well, if this is the future that's becoming more evenly distributed, what does that more evenly distributed look like? You know, and so that applies to all sorts of things. You know, I think about like sort of cell phone networks in Japan and what cell phone culture looks like in Japan, and does that become more evenly distributed? You look at something like the iPad coming out and you say, oh, is this going to be more evenly distributed? But there are other kinds of interesting aspects of that too, because you can look at something like the country of Afghanistan and say, oh, here's a place where the future hasn't been evenly distributed. You know, women's rights are severely curtailed, lifespans are short. There's all sorts of parts of our future that, you know, theoretically could be more evenly distributed over there. The thing about that is that it also demands that we sort of understand what the narrative is, that we understand that which data points are creating the dominant narrative, and that we understand where the storylines are going. You know, if I'm George Bush and I say that democracy is an ascendant storyline for the last 250 years, then applying it in Iraq makes a lot of sense, because I know the storyline. This is democracy. Democracy goes everywhere. But if we look at that from another lens, if I go back and I look at something like Afghanistan or like Bangladesh. Bangladesh is really interesting to me. If I look at a place where there's resource scarcity, and I'm looking at a country that's dealing with resource scarcity, then I start to wonder, well, what does resource scarcity look? And if resource scarcity is the story that's going to become more evenly distributed, what does that tell us also about other kinds of cultural imports? Do we become more and more set in our ways as there's more scarcity? Do we fight up against each other more? Is there some point where Republicans and Democrats take to the streets and just shoot each other because we just stopped getting along at some point and we want to take the territory? Those are the kinds of things that I sort of spin out in my head, and I ask, well, what story is going to be the dominant one? When I look at some place like Bangladesh, I was just recently became enamored of shipbreaking yards, the Chittagong shipbreaking yards. And if you've never seen these are amazing. There's a photographer named Edward Bertinsky who's taken some fantastic photos of this, and there's actually a film called Manufactured Landscapes, which documents some of this. And you see a landscape of where our stuff goes to die. But what you also see is that Bangladesh isn't just the place where we're dumping these things because they've got crummy labor laws and crummy environmental controls. The other thing is that for Bangladesh, ships are a resource. They aren't recycling those ships, they're mining them. And that's really interesting. I think, oh, there's something that tells me about resource scarcity is here. Our manufactured objects are resources. So what does that look like down the road? If resources are scarce, what do we do with our resources and how do we treat them? And what does Bangladesh have to tell me about what would an America look like with the resource scarcity problem? So there are things like that I'm really interested in. But again, it just kind of keeps coming back to that question of what data points we like to look at. And so in science fiction, I'm sort of an outlier because not many people are particularly interested in writing in sort of environmental issues. But that doesn't really make me write. It just makes me sort of one line of thought. And so what you'll see is that science fiction writers will touch on anything. Robert Sawyer is going to write about a different set of storylines and data points than Charlie Stross is going to write a different set of data points than Neil Stephenson. You're going to see that divergence of what we look at. And we're all sort of feeling the elephant blind. I'm grabbing onto the leg and claiming that this is really a tree that we're looking at in the future. And somebody else is grabbing the trunk and claiming it's a snake. Good luck. We're trying to figure that out. But one of the things that's really interesting to me about how we go about looking at those trends is that, I guess when I tend to look at a certain set of data points that don't seem to show up in the news a lot. I guess that's the thing. And a lot of those data points tend to be about distributed sort of topics or distributed issues. I'm really interested in why is this small furry mouse in the Sierras going extinct? And it's not going to get a lot of news, and so it's not a big data point. And I'm trying to figure out whether or not that data is actually maybe the most telling piece of information about where we're going, more telling than North Korea and South Korea getting into a huge fight, more important than whether or not the iPhone OS or Android OS is going to win, more telling than any of those things. And but it's interesting that we sort of have a hard time looking at those. I'm going to read another section here. This is from a short story called The Tamarisk Hunter. Let's see if I can find it right. Sorry. All right. A big tamarisk can suck 73,000 gallons of river water a year. For $2.88 a day plus water bounty, Lolo rips tamarisk all winter long. 10 years ago, it was a good living. Back then, tamarisk shouldered up against every riverbank in the Colorado River Basin, along with cottonwoods, Russian olives, and elms. 10 years ago, towns like Grand Junction and Moab thought they could still squeeze life from a river. Lolo stands on the edge of a canyon, Maggie the camel, his only companion. He stares down into the deeps. It's an hour's scramble to the bottom. He ties Maggie to a juniper and starts down, boot skiing a gully. A few blades of green grass sprout neon around him, piercing juniper-tagged snow clods. In the late winter, there's just a beginning surge of water down in the deeps. The ice is off the river edges. Up high, the mountains still wear their ragged mantles of snow. Lolo smears through mud and hits a channel of scree, sliding and scattering rocks. His jugs of tamarisk poison gurgle and slosh on his back. His shovel and rock bar snag on occasional junipers as he skids by. It'll be a long hike out, but then that's what makes this patch so perfect. It's a long way down, and the riverbanks are largely hidden. It's a living. Where other people have dried out and blown away, he has remained, a tamarisk hunter, a water tick, a stubborn bit of weed. Everyone else has blown off the land as surely as dandelion seeds, set free to fly south or east or most of all north to where watersheds sometimes still run deep, and where, even if there's no more lush ferns or deep fish deep, cold fish runs, at least there's still water for people. Eventually, Lolo reaches the canyon bottom. Down in the cold shadows, his breath steams. He pulls out a digital camera and starts shooting as proof. The Bureau of Reclamation has gotten uptight about proof. They want different angles on the offending tamarisk. They want each one photographed before and after. The whole process documented, GPSed, and uploaded directly by the camera. And they want it done on site. And then they still sometimes come out to spot check before they calibrate his head gate for water bounty. But all their due diligence can't protect them from the likes of Lolo. Lolo has found the secret to eternal life as a tamarisk hunter. Unknown to the Interior Department and its BUREC subsidiary, he's been seeding new patches of tamarisk, encouraging vigorous brushy groves in previously cleared areas. He has hauled and planted healthy roof balls up and down the river system in strategically hidden and inaccessible corridors, all in a bid for security against the swarms of other tamarisk hunters that scour these same tributaries. Lolo is crafty. Stands like this one, a quarter-mile long and thick with salt-laden tamarisk, are his insurance policy. Documentation finished, he unstraps a folding saw along with his rock bar and shovel and sets his poison jugs on the dead salt bank. He starts cutting, slicing into the roots of the tamarisk, pausing every 30 seconds to spread Garlon 4 on the cuts, poisoning the tamarisk wounds faster than they can heal. But some of the best tamarisk, the most vigorous, he uproots and sets aside for later use. $288 a day, plus water bounty. It takes Maggie's rolling, bleeding camel stride a week to make it back to Lolo's homestead. They follow the river, occasionally climbing above it onto cold mesas or wandering off into the open desert in a bid to avoid the skeleton sprawl of emptied towns. Gardy choppers buzz up and down the river like swarms of angry yellowjackets hunting for porta-pumpers and wildcat diversions. They rush overhead in a wash of beaten air and gleaming National Guard logos. Lolo remembers a time when the Guardies traded pot shots with people down on the riverbanks, tracer fire and machine gun chatter echoing in the canyons. He remembers the glorious hiss and arc of a Stinger missile as it flashed across Red Rock Desert and blue sky and burned a chopper where it hovered. But that's long in the past. Now, Guardy patrols skim up the river unmolested. Lolo tops another mesa and stares down at the familiar landscape of an eviscerated town, its curving streets and subdivision cul-de-sacs all sitting silent in the sun. At the very edge of the empty town, 1-acre ranchettes and snazzy 5,000-square-foot houses with dead stick trees and dust hill landscaping fringe a brown tumbleweed golf course. The sand traps don't even show anymore. When California put its first calls on the river, no one really worried. A couple towns went begging for water. Some idiot newcomers with bad water rights stopped grazing their horses, and that was it. A few years later, people started showering real fast. And a few after that, they showered once a week. And then people started using the buckets. By then, everyone had stopped joking about how hot it was. It didn't really matter how hot it was. The problem wasn't lack of water or an excess of heat. Not really. The problem was that 4.4 million acre-feet of water were supposed to go down the river to California. There was water. They just couldn't touch it. They were supposed to stand there like dumb monkeys and watch it flow on by. Lolo? The voice catches him by surprise. Maggie startles and groans and lunges for the mesa edge before Lolo can rein her around. The camel's great padded feet scuffle dust and Lolo flails for his shotgun where it nestles in a scabbard at the camel's side. He forces Maggie to turn, shotgun half drawn, barely holding onto his seat, and swearing. A familiar face, tucked amongst the juniper tangle. God damn it! Lolo lets the shotgun drop back into its scabbard. Jesus Christ, Travis, you scared the hell out of me. Travis grins. He emerges from amongst the juniper's silver bark rags, one hand on his gray fedora, the other on the reins as he guides his mule out of the trees. Surprised? I could have shot you! Oh, don't be so jittery. There's no one out here except us water ticks. Yeah, that's what I thought the last time I went shopping down there. I had a whole set of new dishes for Annie, and I broke them all when I ran into an ultralight parked right in the middle of the main drag. Meth flyers? Beats the hell out of me. I didn't stick around to ask. Shit, I'll bet they were as surprised as you were. They almost killed me. Well, I guess they didn't. Lolo shakes his head and swears again, this time without anger. Despite the ambush, he's happy to run into Travis. It's lonely country, and Lolo's been out long enough to notice the silence of talking to Maggie. They trade ritual sips of water from their canteens and make camp together. They swap stories about BUREC and avoid discussing where they've been ripping tamarisk and enjoy the view of the empty town far below with its serpentine streets and quiet houses and shining, untouched river. It isn't until the sun is setting and they've finished roasting a magpie that Lolo finally asks the question that's been on his mind ever since Travis's sun-baked face came out of the tangle. It goes against etiquette, but he can't help himself. He picks magpie out of his teeth and says, "I thought you were working downriver." Travis glances sidelong at Lolo, and in that one suspicious, uncertain look, Lolo sees that Travis has hit a lean patch. He's not smart like Lolo. He hasn't been reseeding. He's got no insurance. He hasn't been thinking about all the competition and what the tamarisk endgame looks like, and now he's feeling the pinch. Lolo feels a twinge of pity. He likes Travis. A part of him even wants to tell Travis the secret, but he stifles the urge. The stakes are too high. Water crimes are serious now, so serious Lolo hasn't even told his wife Annie for fear of what she'll say. Like all of the most shameful crimes, water theft is a private business, and at the scale Lolo works, forced labor on the straw is the best punishment he can hope for. Travis gets his hackles down over Lolo's invasion of his privacy and says, "I had a couple cows I was running up here, but I lost them. I think something got them." "That's a long way to graze cows." "Yeah, well, down my way even the sagebrush is dead. Big Daddy Drought's doing a real number on my patch." He pinches his lip, thoughtful. "I wish I could find those cows." "Well, they probably went down to the river." Travis sighs. "Well, then the Guardies probably got them. Probably shot them from a chopper and roasted them." Californians. They both spit at the word. The sun continues to sink. Shadows fall across the town's silent structures. Rooftops gleam ruby, a red cluster decorating the Blue River necklace. "You think there's any stands worth pulling down there?" Travis asks. "Well, you can go down and look, but I think I got it all last year, and someone had already been there through before me, so I doubt much is coming up." "Shit. Well, maybe I'll go shopping. Might as well get something out of this trip." "There sure isn't anyone to stop you." As if to emphasize the fact, the thud-thwap of a Guardy chopper breaks the evening silence. The black fly dot of its movement barely shows against the darkening sky. Soon it's out of sight, and cricket chirps swallow the last evidence of its passing. Travis sighs. "Remember when the Guardies said they'd keep out the looters? I saw them on TV with all their choppers and Humvees and them all saying they were going to protect everything until the situation improved." He laughs again. "You remember that? All them driving up and down the streets?" "I remember. Sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't have fought them more." "Annie was at Lake Havasu City when they fought there. You saw what happened." Lolo shivers. "Anyway, there's not much to fight for once they blow up your water treatment plant. If nothing's coming out of your faucet, you might as well move on." "Yeah, well, sometimes I think you still gotta fight, even if it's just for pride." Travis gestures at the town below, a shadow movement. "I remember when all that land down there was selling like hotcakes, and they were building shit as fast as they could. They ship in the lumber. Shopping malls and parking lots and subdivisions anywhere you could scrape a flat spot." "Yeah, well, we weren't calling it Big Daddy Drought back then." 45,000 people, and none of us had a clue. And I was a real estate agent." Travis laughs, a self-mocking sound that ends quickly. It sounds too much like self-pity for Lolo's taste. They're quiet again, looking down at the town wreckage. "I think I might be heading north," Travis says finally. Lolo glances over, surprised. Again he has the urge to let Travis in on his secret, but he stifles it. "And do what?" "I don't know, pick fruit maybe? Maybe something else. Anyway, there's water up there." Lolo points down at the river. "There's water." "Not for us." Travis pauses. I gotta level with you, Lolo. I went down to the straw." For a second, Lolo is confused by the non sequitur. The statement is too outrageous, and yet Travis's face is serious. "The straw? No kiddin'? All the way down there?" "All the way there." He shrugs defensively. "I wasn't finding any tamarisk anyway. And it didn't actually take that long. It's a lot closer than it used to be. A week out to the train tracks, and then I hopped a coal train and rode it right to the interstate, and then I hitched." "What's it like out there?" "Empty. A trucker told me that California and the Interior Department drew up all these plans to decide which cities they'd turn off when." He looks at Lolo significantly. "That was after Lake Havasu. They figured they had to do it slow, worked out some kind of formula, how many cities, how many people they could evaporate at a time without making too much unrest. Got advice from the Chinese, from when they were shutting down all their old communist factories. Anyway, it looks like they're pretty much done with it. There's nothing moving out there except highway trucks and coal trains and a couple truck stops." "And you saw the straw?" "Oh sure, I saw it. Out toward the border. Big old mother. So big you couldn't climb on top of it. Flopped out on the desert like a damn silver snake, all the way to California. He spits reflexively. They're spraying with concrete to keep water from seeping into the ground, and they've got some kind of carbon fiber stuff over this top to stop the evaporation. And the river, it just disappears inside. Nothing but an empty canyon below, bone dry, and choppers and Humvees everywhere like a goddamn hornet's nest. They wouldn't let me get any closer than half a mile on account of the eco-crazies trying to blow it up. They weren't nice about it either. Well, what'd you expect? I don't know. It sure depressed me, though. They work us out here and toss us a little water bounty, and then all that water next year goes right down that big old pipe. Some Californian's probably filling his swimming pool with last year's water bounty right now. Cricket song pulses in the darkness. Off in the distance, a pack of coyotes starts yipping. The two of them are quiet for a while. Finally, Lolo chucks his friend on the shoulder. Aw, hell, Travis, it's probably for the best. A desert's a stupid place to put a river anyway. So, that sort of future doesn't have to exist. It's based on an extrapolation of the way that we currently run water rights and some pretty immutable laws about how water is organized. Phoenix has lower water rights than California, and that's just the way it's going to be. Theoretically, with water rights, when there's scarcity, what happens is the least important holder of the water right will lose their right so that the next most important holder can get all of their right. And so there's a cascade of people having their water turned off, and you see that happening in major drought times. The thing that's interesting is that Lake Powell and Lake Mead are having a hard time refilling right now. The Colorado River Basin is having a hard time refilling itself right now, even as our population has increased. We are moving towards scarcity, and how we decide to adapt to that is sort of up for grabs. The thing that's interesting is that hasn't stopped Phoenix from growing. It hasn't stopped any of us from growing, and it hasn't stopped us from making the assumption that we can sort of duck around our essential resource inputs. And so what I hope is that I can write a story that gives a person a visceral experience of something that's actually fairly abstract. We've known for a long time that the Lake Powell isn't refilling. In fact, it's lower every year. But what does that mean? It's just abstract. It doesn't really do anything. And so I want to run out an extrapolation that sort of says, well, this is kind of what it looks like. And so that's sort of my attempt to use science fiction to talk about some specific issues and to look at a certain set of data points that aren't really in the news particularly. Oh, what's the water level of Lake Powell? Really, who gives a shit? And maybe we should, though. And so that's sort of what I'm interested in. One of the other sort of interesting data points that's just kind of come up is the Deepwater Horizon explosion in the Gulf, which isn't really interesting to me as an environmental tragedy. It's, okay, we got another oil rig that blew up and whatever. What's really interesting to me actually is how we as a society react to that data point. And so, because there are things that we can extrapolate from it. And the thing that really strikes me about Deepwater Horizon, that oil rig, is that it was an ultra-deep water drill rig, which means that it could drill in depths up to 10,000 feet of water. And it actually set the record for drilling by drilling down 36,000 feet into the earth. It can drill down 6 miles, and it can do it in deep water. And you don't build a drill rig like that. You don't create that sort of technological gee whiz thing. I mean, this is high tech. And you don't do that unless all the easy stuff is gone. That's what Deepwater Horizon, the existence of Deepwater Horizon as an object tells us that we're running out of cheap, easy access oil. We're running out of our cheapest, easiest energy source. That's what's most interesting about Deepwater Horizon. It's not that it blew up, it's that it exists at all. And so that's sort of, when I look at that, that's saying there's a data point there that's saying something really interesting that we aren't really grappling with in the news, again, because of its sort of distributed, kind of intangible nature. What does a loss of cheap energy look like? The other thing that's sort of interesting to me about Deepwater Horizon is how we interact with that explosion in terms of we make fun of it a lot. I've actually been watching the Twitter feeds where there's a couple of awesome Twitter feeds out there, one of which is let's see, let me find it, because BP Global PR is the Twitter feed, which is hilarious. I mean, and this is where they sort of pretend to be the CEOs of BP and make all sorts of snide comments like, we think the ocean looks slimmer in black, and things like that. And it's awesome. It's a lot of fun. And there's a tag BP Cares, which is a lot of fun too. The thing is we poke fun at them and we scorn them, but basically BP is just a dog that we sent out to fetch. And then we're blaming it because it didn't get the bone. I mean, basically, you send out a dog, you say, go fetch that, go get that bone. And it comes back and you say, oh, good dog, here's a treat. And that's what we do with BP. We say, go get us some oil, come back, we'll give you some money. And so they were just doing what we asked them to do. The fact that they're failures at it, well, that's when we start scorning them. But we would have been perfectly happy tossing them little treats as long as they kept doing it anyway. We were trying to send them out. And that's another thing that's interesting to me is we don't really engage very well with what our supply chains are, how far we reach. We like our sort of consumer objects to not have a history. And right now, when we look at Deepwater Horizon, suddenly the gas in my tank has a history. And what do? I actually don't say, well, I was sticking gas in my tank, which is asking BP to go hunt there. I actually just say, oh, you suck over there. And that's really interesting to me because I think we do that in a lot with our consumer objects, and it's another one of those sort of hidden data points about how we engage with our world. If I look at something like the iPad, it's a historyless object. It lacks any history. I don't know whether there's lithium or nickel or copper in there. I don't know which mines that might have come out of. I don't know anything about the object. It's supposed to come to me pristine. It's like virgin birth, sort of. And I'm supposed to love it just for itself, and then it's going to disappear, and it's not going to have any afterlife either, because I'm not going to know about that either. And our sort of like. I feel like when I see something like the Deepwater Horizon explosion, for just this brief moment that we sort of lifted the curtain and we're looking at the full extent of our supply chain, where drilling is happening, what happens, people die doing it. And that's actually true all the time. It's just not a big enough news story for us to really care. The last thing that's really interesting to me about Deepwater Horizon is how we characterize it as an environmental catastrophe. And this actually goes back to how we look at data points that might be important to us. And we look at Deepwater Horizon and we say, oh my God, all that oil is washing up on all of these wetlands. But the reality is we were just going to burn it out our tailpipes anyway. So we're just pissed off that we didn't get to do the polluting. That's it. That's it. They got to it first. So they dump it all over there, and goddamn it, I wanted to burn it and send it into the atmosphere. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to use that for global warming instead of just poisoning some little wetland over there. I had a big plan for this. So, at that moment, there's this thing where you have this weird sort of response to environmental catastrophe. We respond really well to point source catastrophes like this. We can see it, we can respond to it, we understand it, we can engage with it. We actually probably will eventually plug that well. But we aren't going to stick anything in our tailpipes. Not really. And I know that because I just got on a plane to fly out to talk to all of you guys. So, there's the hypocrisy right there. And so, hating this kind of pollution while sort of engaging in a daily set of behaviors that are fundamentally destructive, that's a really interesting human capacity that we have. And that's something that I'm really interested in my fiction, because I sort of feel like, again, we're in this space where the catastrophes that face us are distributed, they're not tangible, they're long-term, and they're really unclear, and there's a lot of uncertainties in them. And so I hope that when I write science fiction and sort of look at drought or look at how chemicals might disrupt our endocrine systems and turn us all into stupid people, or how agricultural companies with their IP and their and Terminator genes might actually really change the way that we interact with food, that those are ideas that we can spin out and kind of look at and play with and maybe interact with in a more tangible, visceral way than we would otherwise. It's really, so there's this point where I just sort of have to say, yes, I want my characters to be interesting. Yes, I want my stories to be fascinating and gripping. And yes, I actually am this evangelist banging on my pulpit trying to get people to pay attention to some things that are pretty interesting and fundamental, and that we mostly spend our time not looking at, and that we prefer not to. So anyway, that's pretty much, sort of my shtick. So do you have any questions about any of this?
Actually, if you can use the mics for our YouTube audience, that would be preferred. I wouldn't chance it.
So it was actually very interesting what you were saying about Deep Horizon, and I was sort of like trying to think as an analogy, kind of Google and kind of what we do. And one of the things I was thinking about is Deep Horizon. It's not just that it's the cheapest or all the cheap oil sources of oil are used up, so we're moving to that. It's that even though it's expensive, it really does it at scale, right? You can get a lot of oil out of that thing, which you may not be able to do in cheaper sources. And I wondered if you had thought, and kind of coming here, if you had thought about kind of Google and kind of what our role is, how we do it, not in oil, obviously, but with information and et cetera.
Yeah, I've thought about it. I actually have these really complicated sort of feelings about big companies generally, because they sort of seem to be both promise and peril all wrapped in one. But yeah, with Google, the things that stand out to me, I mean, on one level, you're doing some really interesting things with sustainability. On the other hand, Google exists as a commerce engine, basically. It exists off of advertising. It lubricates consumption. And if there's anything that we understand about sort of our impacts on the world, lubricating consumption is probably bad. And so there's a certain number of things that you can do because you're well-financed by my bad buying habits. So it's sort of like you're standing in the middle of that stream of consumption and plucking out a certain number of fish, but at the same time, that stream of consumption and enabling that stream of consumption is probably leading us in unsustainable directions. And so I'm not sure if you get to a point where you can get enough benefit from the stream of consumption that you can actually sort of offset the damage of the stream of consumption. So I'm not sure really how you balance that. That's sort of my quick and dirty take.
Hi, and thank you for coming. One thought I had about this, what you described as the stories that interest you, it seems like another common factor of them is that they're very slow. They take years to happen instead of happening over the course of a day or a week or so forth. And this puts in mind an idea that's been floating around very recently, which is about how people in their 40s and 50s think of urban centers as very high crime, because in the 70s, when they were young, they were very high crime. But in fact, violent crime is way lower than it's been since then. But we still have these sort of memories of that, and so we still treat them as that. We helicopter our kids and so forth and so on. And so it's like, is there a sort of, like our resource consumption habits, do they also sort of follow from our childhood experiences of the world? And what other habits do we have that can't move forward or get locked into a mindset from decades past and are hard to move forward? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I think we, especially in the United States, I sort of feel like we actually have, we start out with a really high comfort level of consumption. I'm seeing that in my kid right now, where he's got a certain number of toys in his room. The fact that he has his own room is actually really interesting too. I mean, there's like the things that we take for granted as just the assumed level of an adequate prosperity. Not crazy prosperity, but an adequate prosperity are so ingrained in us at this point. I assume that a decent living is having a 3-bedroom home and a small plot of land in Paonia, Colorado. I mean, which is ex-urban sprawl and a whole bunch of other things. I can just go off on that too. But basically, I mean, when you grow up saying that three bedrooms is the norm, then that means that scaling back is a really tough thing, because we do perceive loss in that. And when we grow up with those assumptions as that's our human right, essentially, that's really interesting. And I spent a bunch of time in China. My wife's family comes from India, actually, and so we've spent a bunch of time over there. And seeing the difference of assumption about what prosperity looks like and is really interesting, because prosperity is really this moving target. It's actually not this absolute thing will make you happy. If I just have 3 bedrooms, that's always the happiness thing. Or if I have 1 bedroom, that's the happiness thing. I mean, there's a family that I used to stay with in China, and they had a 2-bedroom apartment that was about the size of my living room in my current house. And we were all packed in there together, but nobody was sitting around saying, oh, life is so hard. They were actually hanging out with each other and being convivial. And so there was a weird moment when I went back to our very empty house in the United States and thought, what do we do with all this space? And then my stepmother at the time was really pissed off that I was even at the house at all. She felt like I was just crowding her too much. We could be on different levels of the house in totally different parts. I'm like, you can't even see, hear, or smell me. Like, really, I'm so far away. This is like, but I was still invading her gigantic bubble that she had for space. And I'm thinking, my God, I was shoulder to shoulder with people and they weren't bothered by me. Like, and here this is like, so those habits, and it makes it hard for us to have a rational conversation about what our needs really are, our needs versus our wants, and being able to separate those out. And probably that's really connected to sustainability. So.
Well, again, thank you for coming. And despite all the talk about need versus want, you should want to buy this book. It's an excellent read.
Yeah, kill more trees for me.
And I think you'll all enjoy it. Paolo Bacigalupi. Thank you very much for coming to Google.
Thank you.